Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry to stop you from all your chatter, but please keep eating while we go. Well, as Greg said, my name's Jessica Brown. I'm a research fellow in the Social Foundations program here at the Centre. I'd like to welcome you today, and I'd especially like to welcome Toby Hall, who will be our speaker for today. Toby is the CEO of Mission Australia, the largest not-for-profit in the community welfare field. Mission Australia is a non-denominational Christian organisation which transforms the lives of disadvantaged people through early childhood, youth programs, homeless and housing services, vocational training and employment services. And apart from his role at Mission Australia, Toby's also a director of Working Links, which is the UK's largest provider of welfare to work programs, and also a director of Good Start, provider of early learning services to over 60,000 children here in Australia. Many of you will have met Toby before because he has attended, I believe, the last two conciliums and spoken at the most recent concilium conference that we had. Toby spoke at concilium about social impact bonds, but I've asked him here to talk about a different topic today, and that is more about the type of work that Mission Australia does and to reflect on his thoughts on the welfare debate and the debate about welfare reform in Australia. I've seen Toby talk about this before and I think it's particularly enlightening, so I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Please join me in welcoming Toby Hall.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you, Greg, for having me here today. It's an honour to be with you and just to talk about an area which I think probably hasn't had as much focus in the last few years as it should and is starting to come to the fore. And we'll talk about welfare reform and how perhaps we can create a better system. I'm very mindful that in life sometimes we create things and come up with concepts which ostensibly are quite logical, but the outcomes are not quite what we expected. Many of you will know the child's nursery rhyme, Humpty Dumpty, which is Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, Humpty Dumpty had a big fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Well, I actually lived in the town where Humpty Dumpty came from. And Humpty Dumpty actually wasn't a big egg at all, but someone had a very bright idea, which was to defend this town of Colchester in England. If you put a big gun up on the wall, all you had to do was point it at the enemy and they would run away and the town would be safe. Which actually, you can see, is fairly logical in some ways. However, anyone who has a basic understanding of physics knows exactly what happens to big guns when they get fired. So on the first attempt to fire the gun, the cannon went one way and the gun went the other and got absolutely smashed to pieces. And their bright idea, which had ostensibly been good, backfired on them. I actually think we're in a situation in the Western world today that what has been an ostensibly good idea is starting to backfire on us and is starting to backfire on us quite significantly. If we look across the United States and across Europe, whose situation is far more dire than Australia, we're waking up to the concept that we can't actually afford to pay for the lifestyle that we would like. And the promise of an age pension for most people in the Western world that is owed to them by the government and society is one which is unlikely to be fulfilled. The concept of welfare, that you can receive a benefit with no responsibility, which has been predominantly the system for unemployed people in the Western world since 1933 or so, is one which is backfiring, and the Western world cannot afford to pay for it anymore. And we actually need to look at, well, how do we deal with the situation that we've got ourselves into, where we've created a welfare environment which is an entitlement model, where people expect that the society around them will look after them, and move from that to what I would call a participation-based model, that where someone receives a benefit, there actually is a responsibility which comes alongside it. Now, let me be clear before I get into the discussion here that we have to acknowledge that there are people who quite rightly need society's support and should receive it. I've been doing a lot of aeroplane travel over the last 2 or 3 weeks and exhausted everything on the television on the plane, and my wife persuaded me to watch a program called Downton Abbey, which I had never watched. And it's vaguely interesting anyway. But one of the things which struck me was the lord of the manor employed a crippled man who had shrapnel in his knee. And this was dated about 1911. And the reality for that man is that unless he had a benevolent employer, he would never have got a job. And he equally would never have got any support from the wider society around him apart from in poorhouses. And actually, when you look at his life, he's gone and fought for his country, he's done the right thing, and he's been injured and he's been disabled. Quite rightly, someone like that should have our support. And in society today, there are people who are, through no fault of their own, injured, hurt, unable to participate in the workforce. They may have mental health issues or physical issues. And those people, quite rightly, all of us, I think, would say we need to have a suitable, sensible welfare system to support those people and help them have the best life they can have in our society. And I think that's generally accepted by most of us. Equally, there are people who are receiving benefits who are able-bodied, capable of working, and at the moment are in a system where they don't necessarily have to participate. And you have to question, well, is that fair and is that reasonable for society? And how do you separate those two groups out? Our simple motto around this is that work for those who can and support for those who can't. Those people who are capable of work, we have to create a participation model in society for them which has expectations which come with support from society. But those people who cannot work, we are, as a society, should stand alongside them. And I need to premise this discussion with that up front. Having said that, let's get into the reality of our thinking. If I went around the room, I think the spectrum of views would be from the unemployed in Australia are lazy, they're there because of their failure, and they don't really deserve much help. They should get up off their backsides and go and get a job. That would be one end of the spectrum of views. The other end of the spectrum of views would be society has let people down. They're unemployed through no fault of their own. We shouldn't blame them. And actually, we should keep on supporting them and giving them benefits and actually not expect too much from them. And unfortunately, there is a number of people in my sector who would hold to that particular perspective. My personal view is actually that neither of those are true. I don't think that the society that isn't working today receiving benefits is full of lazy people. Equally, I don't think they're full of people who should actually be given the perspective that they shouldn't participate in society. And so we have to look at how do we deal with the situation. Well, let's talk about Australia. Today, we have 800,000 people who receive a disability support pension. That is up from 300,000 people in 1991. A growth rate of our population in that period of time was around 30%. The growth in people who can't work through disability has, in theory, been 130%. It's estimated that of the 800,000 people who are currently on a disability support pension, at least 140,000 of those people are capable of working quite actively in the workforce. Of the group that's moved on to a benefit, and particularly a disability support benefit, 35% of those have come from the ranks of the unemployed in Australia. So they've moved from an unemployment benefit to a disability support benefit. And there's an important message in there for society, because an unemployment benefit has a level of mutual obligation required with it. A disability support benefit has virtually no mutual obligation required with it. And it's very sad to say, for some people, the highest aspiration they have in life is to move from an unemployment benefit to a disability support benefit, where they have higher payments, higher support from society, and virtually no requirement to participate. This is not a good message for them or for society. We have 500,000 children, which is the highest rate of children in unemployed families in the world, currently living in jobless families. When you look at single parent households, 1 in 2 single parent households do not have someone employed in the household. Worse than that, when you get into health statistics, you really would not want to be unemployed in Australia. Studies show that long-term joblessness increases the risk of heart disease, lung cancer and suicide. In fact, for young men outside the workforce for 6 months or more, the rate of suicide increases 40-fold. And I've said recently, welfare should probably be renamed sickfare, because the reality is after 6 months on a welfare benefit, most people fall into long-term depression. However, there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's evidence that we can create change. Before I get into that though, one of the key issues that is stopping people moving off benefits is actually we've created in our society a bunch of disincentives to move back into employment. People receive a range of benefits when they're unemployed. So they may receive health benefit cards, they receive housing benefit support, they receive child benefit support. And unfortunately, those don't necessarily work together in a sensible fashion when someone receives a job. Quite often when someone receives a job, they can lose their health benefits. And if you are someone who is on a support pension and you've got a disability and you need health support, you absolutely don't want to lose your health benefits. But at the moment, a lot of people can lose their health benefits when they move into work. Equally, people who are on an unemployment benefit once they move into work can actually have their housing at risk because of the level of income they're paid. And so, again, there's a disincentive. And the highest rate of marginal tax now moving from unemployment into employment is 76% of every dollar that you earn. And, that is illogical, and we have to create a model which is different from that, which is let's remove the disincentives. If we can go through a process of removing the disincentives, we can then start to look at what does welfare reform or reform of this system look like. The first principle I think we have to take on board is that a benefit absolutely comes with a responsibility to participate in society and in government programs to help you move from a benefit into the workforce. Participation needs to be fair and reasonable, but it needs to be something which is the expectation, not the exception. There's an old saying by Solomon which is, without vision the people perish, and the reality is with unemployment that is absolutely the case. Where people lose hope of moving into employment, we see them perish around us, and if you want to see that to its worst extent, our remote Indigenous communities are an incredibly good example of what happens when there is a lack of vision. However, when you start to create vision and participation, things can change. I'll talk about a model which was distinctly unpopular with people in my sector, which is a thing which is called work for the dole. The average member of the public actually likes the concept and the name of work for the dole because a lot of people think that's a good thing. People should work for the dole. The Howard government certainly thought that that was a good name, but in my sector it wasn't particularly popular. And I have to say it myself, I was challenged around my thinking for this to say, well, what are the benefits and is this really helping people in terms of moving towards society? And it's not until you get out and talk to people who are participating in a program like Work for the Dole, you suddenly see that it can have significant social benefits. In the Riverlands down in South Australia, I was at one of the programs one day with one of my staff who wasn't particularly politically correct, but took me round and introduced me to a few of the people on the Work for the Dole program. And her introduction was, Catherine over here is a druggie. Now, we don't tend to call people that in our sector, but she was one of the more open people in her views, and Catherine was a druggie. In fact, she was a heroin addict. The 2 days a week on the Work for the Dole program, though, were the 2 days a week where she actually stayed off heroin for a whole day. The next lady she introduced me to was a victim of domestic violence, and she said for her that those 2 days a week were the only days that she was free in the daytime from domestic violence. And as she took me around and introduced me to more and more people who came from very challenging, difficult backgrounds, I started to see that participation in a program like Work for the Dole is more than an enforced model of creating work. It's actually a model which reintroduces people to a social network. And for many of the people who are on a benefit and on a disability pension, they lack a social network that most of us take for granted, which we get from the workforce. One of the reasons that depression is so high in people out of the workforce is they've lost their social network. So some of the participation models we've created, which seem fairly basic, which maybe some people look at as menial, are actually a model which start to recreate social connection. And if you can socially connect well, then you're in a much better position to start to move into the real workforce than you would be otherwise. So models which allow connection socially are absolutely vital. If we have a model of participation, our expectation is that participation looks like this. Firstly, an able-bodied person should absolutely be working to seek a full-time job. Secondly, we should be providing them as society the opportunity to have the correct vocational training which will allow them to succeed in that employment field that they want to go into. We need for some people to create work experience models which will allow them to get into a workforce in a labour environment that otherwise they probably wouldn't come into. Now, some of you will be employers, and the reality is if I gave you the choice of paying $40,000 a year for a person who hadn't worked for 10 years and asked you to manage the process of integrating them into the workforce, you would probably be a little bit reticent to manage that process because it will cost your business. However, if I turned around and said, I'll pay you $20,000 to integrate that person into your workforce, and you take the responsibility to pay for them beyond that point once they're integrated, then there's a different equation because you're starting to create people who are work ready. Work experience models are absolutely vital in Australia, and I'll talk you through a couple of those in a minute. Another model which we need to see more of, and you will have seen the concept of social enterprise talked about quite a lot in recent years. My view of social enterprises in terms of job creation are they really intermediate labour markets where they create a safe place to train people in work. Now let me talk you through that part of the issue because there is a problem in that if you've not been in the workforce and you've grown up in a community that many of the other people around you have not been in the workforce, and if you take a young Indigenous kid whose mum and dad haven't worked and brothers and sisters haven't worked, you have no concept of the workforce. You don't know that you have to turn up at work at 9:30 in the morning. You don't necessarily know that there's a supervisor who you have to listen to and you have to follow his instructions. You often don't even know how to communicate. I don't know what your teenagers are like, but my teenagers at 16 had one or two words. It was yes, no, maybe, and in response to how's your day been, it was usually good. And the fact is that communication style doesn't tend to work in the workforce. And so for some of these young people, we actually have to teach them how to communicate, how to relate, how to engage with people so they can participate in the normal workforce. These are skills that people don't grow up with in many of the communities we work in. Now, the social sector is quite right in saying that society has to take a little bit of blame for that because we did create the model which has led to that situation. And where we've got things wrong, I would say it's right for us to create investment which helps fix those things which may be a little bit wrong over here. And programs which can do that, which I call job readiness programs, are absolutely vital for doing that. If we create those sort of programs, I think it's vital then that government and society accepts that participation needs mandatory management process to go with it. There's no point in saying we'll have a range of processes to help people back into the workforce if a group of people just completely ignore that and don't want to participate in it. Currently the government system is inadequate in terms of two things. It fails to assess people's barriers to work correctly, and it also fails to implement participation within even the current models of government participation. So we would argue that assessment of people's needs is absolutely vital because if you don't know what problems people have, you don't know where to spend the money to help create the change to allow them to overcome the barriers so they can enter the workforce. If you can get the assessment of needs right, then participation by that person who's had support in programs which are put together by government are absolutely vital. The compliance regime at the moment that the government runs is used effectively with about 55% of the people who are currently unemployed. And that is to say 45% of people, on average, don't comply with the current obligations which the government put upon them, and the government does absolutely nothing about that. Part of the reason for that is that for a government employee, it's very difficult for them to take some of the action that's needed. Now, if I take you to a remote Indigenous community, Meekatharra is about 10 hours drive from Geraldton in West Australia. If you can imagine living in a town of 700 people and being the Centrelink officer who says that your neighbour is not going to get their benefits for the next 6 weeks, you can imagine that would not necessarily be a nice environment to live in. So the Centrelink officer has no choice other than to cut off benefits or to ignore the situation. And they choose at the moment often to ignore the situation. And so we've argued for a much easier system where actually there are small fines for people who fail to participate, whereby pensions are reduced by a small amount every week on a graduating basis, and essentially on the first week of non-compliance there would be a $5 fine, the second week there would be a $10 fine, and then a $15 fine, to encourage people to back into the compliance regime. In the absence of that, we know that around 45 to 50% of people currently who are unemployed won't actually take the choice to participate. Having put those things in place, we then have to look at what is the cost of taking an unemployed person, whether on a disability support pension or on a New Start allowance, and putting them into the workplace. My experience is, unfortunately, that cost is quite significant, and we're now estimating, after doing a range of programs, that probably the cost is about $15,000 per person. One of the issues we face at the moment is the current government investment in this sort of program is around $6,000 to $7,000 a person, and that investment is, in a number of cases, almost wasted because it's an underinvestment. And the choice we have to make, and this is something we're presenting to governments, is if you create a model where there's absolute participation and there's control over participation, you need to match that with suitable training opportunities to actually move people from out of the workforce into the workforce. If you're only going to carry on with half-hearted attempts at training programs, then you're just wasting your money. Now, to give you some concrete facts behind that, the current training program looking at Certificate 1, 2 and 3, which the government has rolled out for hundreds of thousands of people, currently has about a 7% job placement success rate. So 93% of people who are currently doing government training programs are not getting a job from the training program that they've done. Now, that is a horrendous waste of money. If we put the right investment into those people, we can create jobs. And let me talk about what that right investment looks like. In Victoria, we have established at Mission Australia a restaurant called Charcoal Lane. Charcoal Lane is a normal restaurant. It's in the Age Good Food Guide. I think we got 14 out of 20 points for the restaurant. And it is set up for two things. One, to have a good restaurant. Two, to train young Indigenous unemployed people in the hospitality trade. And every year we have 32 young people going through a training program in a live employer environment. Now, those young people are in a unique situation because they each have access to a social worker and a work support mentor who help them through social issues that they faced, help them through work issues that they faced, so they can be successful in the workforce. Most of them have come from families where no one has worked. They don't understand the concept of work, their families haven't had the concept of work, and what we're having to do is create a safe working environment where they can learn. That means we let people fall and fail at times so they can learn from their failure and rise up again. On that program, which costs around $15,000 per participant, 70% of those young people who previously have been long-term unemployed have moved on to successful workforce participation or further training. 3 of them are now working internationally in restaurants. One of them's in New York and 2 are in France. One of them, a young girl called Marley, has just moved to Uluru to start working there. Marley, when I first met her, wouldn't even look me in the eye or say hello. The last time I saw Marley, she wouldn't shut up. And that was a good thing because what she's learned is confidence in a safe place. But confidence in a safe place to move in the workforce costs money. And we have to be prepared as a society to actually put investment into people like Marley. Another similar program we've put in place is for young mums. As I said earlier, 56% of children from single parent families are living in jobless households, and particularly young mums are in a very difficult position. Participation in school is very difficult for them, and unless they manage to get year 10 qualifications in most of the country, it's going to be very hard for them to get a job. What we've done in Victoria Mission, as well as owning part of Good Start, we actually own our own early learning centres. In Dandenong, which is a slightly disadvantaged community, we've created a program where young mums come to our childcare centres and receive VCE level education while their children are cared for in the room next door. And rather than giving you my words, I can give you the words of a couple of the participation people on the program. Letitia, who's got 2 young children, said, "Aiming high, which is the program, has provided me with an opportunity to go back to school. It's helped me see that I was able to go back to school and it was okay for me to continue education with kids. I'm now motivated to achieve the goals which I'd set before I got pregnant." Now, she's a young person who 56% of the time would have been unemployed for the next 15 years or so. She's now in a position where she's going back, getting education, and she will get into a career and be successful. She's in a position where she's been given an opportunity to set goals, and this is something we can stand up and do. In Wollongong, we're running a program called Soft Landings. Soft Landings is a program which recycles mattresses. We actually take all the old mattresses from a core hotel group, recycle them. 95% of the mattresses recycled. The employees on that program are nearly all people who've come off the disability support pension, a number with severe intellectual disabilities, most of whom have not participated in any form of workforce before. Those people are now participating in a successful workforce program. It's a commercial entity which is making a profit. They're not actually being subsidised by society at all, but more importantly, they've got a job and they know they're successful. So what do the unemployed think of my concept of welfare reform? Well, the reality is, if I ask a number of unemployed people today whether they would like to be forced into a participation-based model, the answer is usually no. In fact, most of us, if we were given the option maybe to have a life where we didn't have to participate, we might turn around and take that choice. The level of pension people are paid is not particularly high, and I have to say in this room, you would have to be absolutely mad to want to survive on one of the pension levels in Australia, particularly the unemployment benefit. So you have to question, well, why is it people are not moving off that pension? And I think part of the problem is fear of change, fear of a different environment, and fear that I can actually succeed within the workforce. Participation, on the one hand, sounds very tough. But what it is a catalyst for change. And the thing that I've seen most at Mission Australia is people who come back and say thank you for forcing me to go through a difficult change process. Now, I don't know what your experience has been like in the workforce, but occasionally in my career, not very often, I've been through performance management processes where you do the annual performance review and there's a list of the things that you do wonderfully, and there's usually a much longer list of the things that you don't do wonderfully. Now, most of us actually don't cherish the discussion around what we don't do well. However, most of us are quite glad that someone was brave enough to take us through the process to discuss what we didn't do well, tell us the truth, and help us overcome the things that we weren't strong at. John is in West Australia, and about 2 years ago I got quite a long letter from him. He'd just come back from a holiday with his 2 children, and he wrote and said that in his life he had never experienced anything as joyful as seeing his 2 daughters playing on the beach at their first holiday. The girls were 12 and 10 and had never been on holiday before, and he said, "The day I got a job, my daughter hugged me and said, 'Well done, Dad.' When I took them on holiday, I saw the joy of having a job, and I realised that my attitude and my life had been wrong, and I've created a different reality for my children because they now see work as part of life." He would have been prepared to carry on living on the dole if someone hadn't pushed a little bit. And what we have to get right is the balance between a carrot to encourage people moving forward, which largely I think is based on getting rid of a range of disincentives for people moving into employment, and then a little bit of stick to encourage a catalytic change in people. And if we can accept that in society, and particularly in Australia, we're probably at a position where we can maybe overcome the failed welfare system that we have. However, not to act will be a disaster for our society. We cannot afford not to act economically on two bases. One, society just can't afford its lifestyle anymore. But two, fundamentally, do we want to be a nation that accepts it's okay for people to sit at home and not participate in our society, and to actually get more and more depressed, more and more lonely, and to be seen as failures? Or do we want to help those people out of that situation and give them an opportunity to participate, to have hope, and to have a future for their families, and to be like John and turn around and say, the joy of seeing my kids play on the beach has been worth the pain that I've been through? Anyway, thank you very much. I hope I've given you a brief introduction to the problems, and we can have a bit of discussion in about 5 minutes.